The kerosene lamp flickered low on the nightstand, throwing long shadows across the wide pine boards. The heavy quilt pressed against my legs, its familiar weight suddenly feeling like too much. I lay still, heart hammering so loud I was sure he could hear it. The old bed frame gave its usual soft creak as I shifted away. "Not tonight," I whispered, my voice barely cutting the thick silence. His breathing stayed steady, but I felt the change in the air, the small distance that grew between us under those quilts. No one had ever told me how heavy a single word could feel inside a marriage blessed by the church. I didn't know then that saying no too many times would slowly change everything. I'm Rebecca Amish, and here on my channel I share the quiet truths I once kept hidden. If these stories touch something deep inside you, I'd be grateful if you subscribed so we can keep walking through them together. Tell me in the comments, have you ever carried a weight you couldn't speak aloud? Now, let me continue. The first weeks after our wedding felt like stepping into a dream I had prayed for since I was a girl. We rode home in the buggy under a soft summer sky, my new prayer cap still stiff on my head. John was gentle, the way the older women had promised good husbands would be. During the day we worked side by side, him in the barn, me at the stove and garden. At night we followed the ways our community had always known. Bundling under the quilts felt sacred at first, a closeness wrapped in prayer and Ordnung. Yet inside my chest something trembled that I couldn't name. I wanted to be the wife I had promised to be. I truly did. One evening after a long day of canning beans, my back ached and my mind felt heavy. When the time came for closeness, I gently pulled the quilt higher and said no. I spoke of exhaustion and needing rest. John lay quiet beside me. He didn't argue. He simply turned, the way a man does when he is trying to understand something new. That was the first clear no. The second came a week later, when the same heavy feeling returned. I mentioned Gelassenheit, yielding to God's timing rather than forcing what didn't feel right in my spirit. His silence that night stretched longer. By the third time, the air in our bedroom had changed. I said no again, my voice small but certain, speaking of discomfort I couldn't fully explain even to myself. John sat up for a while, staring at the floor. He spoke softly about what the ministers taught about marriage and union. There was no anger in his words, only confusion. He was as lost in the expectations as I was. We both wanted to do right. We both carried the teachings we had grown up with. Yet each no seemed to leave a small crack in the life we were trying to build together. Days passed with ordinary work covering the quiet strain. Meals together grew shorter on words. At singings we sat with our people, voices rising in the old Osbund hymns, but I noticed how his hand no longer rested as easily on my back. Family members began to glance longer when we visited. Nothing was said outright, but the eyes carried questions. I told myself it was only in my head. I told myself many things in those early months to keep the peace I thought marriage required. One quiet afternoon my mother pulled me aside while we hung laundry on the line. The sheets snapped in the breeze as she spoke carefully. She told me stories of other young brides who had struggled to learn yielding. "It takes time, Rebecca," she said, her voice full of love and worry. "Some things we learn the hard way." Her words planted a small fear in me. I nodded and kept pinning the clothes, but inside I wondered how many times a woman could say no before the community noticed. Before it became more than just her bedroom. I loved my husband. That part was always true. I loved the steadiness of him, the way he cared for the animals and spoke kindly to the children in our district. I loved the beauty of our people, the way we helped one another, the deep faith that held us. But I also felt my own spirit pressing against something I couldn't name. It was as if my body and heart were being asked to disappear into the role of wife completely. Both things lived inside me at once, love and fear, gratitude and quiet resistance. The next morning I found peace for a little while in the garden. The cool soil under my fingers, the smell of tomato plants warming in the sun, the distant sound of birds. For those hours, everything felt normal again. John smiled at me across the yard. We ate supper with lighter hearts. But that same evening the pattern returned. The fourth no came, then the fifth. His silences grew heavier. And then the bishop's wife came to visit, bringing fresh bread and gentle words about learning true Gelassenheit in marriage. That night after she left, I stood at the window, looking out at the dark fields. I overheard hushed voices from the next room, talk of other cases where Meidung had touched families when Ordnung was not followed. My stomach tightened. I didn't know how much more saying no would cost me. I didn't know yet how far this path would lead, or what the hardest lesson would finally teach. The silence in our home felt louder than any words we had spoken. Those overheard words about Meidung stayed with me through the next Sunday service. I sat on the hard bench with the other women, feeling the weight of watchful eyes even as the hymns rose around us. John sat across the aisle with the men, his shoulders straight, but I saw the small distance in how we moved through the day afterward. Private struggles had a way of becoming communal concern in our world. The Ordnung watched over every part of life, including the quiet spaces between husband and wife. I kept my head down and helped serve the meal, but inside the questions grew louder. Around this time I learned of John's cousin Sarah, who had walked a similar path 2 years earlier. During a quilting bee, the women spoke softly, while needles moved through fabric. Sarah had said no too often in her early marriage. The community responded with concerned visits and longer periods of careful watching. She eventually yielded more fully, but the strain showed in her eyes for a long time. Her story wasn't exactly mine, yet it carved a clear pattern. We sat together that afternoon, the colorful quilt spread across our laps, and I felt both the comfort of shared womanhood and the quiet warning in her careful words. The singing and the quilting brought a small breathing space, moments where faith and friendship reminded me why I loved our ways. The laughter of children outside, the smell of fresh coffee, the rhythm of hands working together. These things were real and good, yet they existed alongside the growing pressure at home. The system asked for complete surrender in marriage, and many women found peace in that yielding. I understood the beauty of it. I also felt the harm when it left no room for a trembling spirit like mine. Both things were true at the same time. The hardest no came on a cold autumn evening. The lantern burned low as I whispered my refusal once more. This time John didn't stay silent. We spoke in low voices about the promises we made, about love and duty and fear. Tears came for both of us. I tried to explain the deep discomfort I carried, and he spoke of his own confusion and desire to care for me rightly. It was not anger between us, but a painful honesty that left the house feeling smaller. That conversation became the turning point I had both dreaded and needed. What followed was the hardest season. For several weeks, a kind of emotional distance settled over our home, like a soft shunning within our own walls. Meals were polite. Nights were quiet. Whispers reached me about how some in the district viewed repeated resistance. The grief of nearly losing the gentle connection with John sat heavy in my chest every single day. I learned then the true cost of those many no's. The system had been designed to protect the marriage, yet in protecting it, it sometimes pressed too hard on tender hearts. I sat in that pain without rushing away from it. One evening I walked alone through the fields at dusk. The cool earth pressed against my shoes. The wide skies stretched above me, painted in soft purples and golds. For the first time in months, I felt my own breath fully. I spoke quietly to God, not in the words I had been taught, but in the simple language of my heart. Something inside me began to reconnect with a faith that could hold both my marriage vows and my need for wholeness. The wind moved through the dry stalks, carrying away some of the shame I had carried. In that open field, the deepest realization came, quiet as the fading light. I understood I could honor my marriage and protect my spirit at the same time. It didn't mean rejecting our ways completely. It meant finding a truer yielding, one that included honesty instead of silent disappearance. John and I were both learning, both shaped by teachings that never prepared us for the real feelings inside a young marriage. The hard way had broken something open in me, not to run away, but to stand more fully inside the life I had chosen. If you are carrying a silent weight like this, one that lives between love and fear, between duty and self, know that you are not alone. I see you. Many of us have walked with trembling hearts under expectations that felt too heavy. The path toward honest breath is possible, even inside the beautiful and imperfect world that raised us. John and I found small, tender words again in the weeks that followed. Not a perfect ending, but an earned one. Sometimes the hardest lessons teach us how to stay while still protecting the quiet flame inside.